You want to know the strangest thing I ever saw out past the Kestrel line? It wasn't a dying star. It wasn't a battle. It was a girl who weighed maybe 50 kilos soaking wet, standing in a training pit, refusing to fall down. I've told this story maybe 100 times now, to rookies, to officers, once to a Vren admiral who didn't believe a word of it until I showed him the recordings. And every single time I start in the same place, with the laughing. Because that's the part people forget. Before any of it happened, they laughed at her. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter much. I was a logistics technician aboard the Halberd station, which orbited a frozen rock called Tobin 9. If you've never heard of it, don't feel bad. Nobody had. It was the kind of posting they gave you when the brass wanted you out of the way but couldn't quite justify discharging you. A holding pen with gravity plating. The station was a joint thing. That was the whole point of it. After humanity got dragged into the Concordat, and trust me, dragged is the right word, the galactic powers decided we needed to be integrated. Which mostly meant they wanted to keep an eye on us. So they set up these mixed garrisons. Humans, Vren, Soltari, a few of the big quiet Garok who never said much and broke everything they touched by accident. We were the joke of the place, the humans I mean. I need you to understand how the galaxy saw us back then. You've got to picture it from their side for a second, because it makes the rest of this hit harder. To the Concordat species, humans were soft. Physically, we were nothing. A Vren could crush a man's skull with one hand and barely think about it. The Soltari moved faster than our eyes could properly track. The Garok were walking tanks. And then there was us. No armor plating in our skin, no secondary heart, no venom, no claws, no echolocation, no nothing. Just 2 arms, 2 legs, and a stubborn streak nobody understood yet. The Vren had a word for us, brittlekin. It meant something like the ones who snap. They thought we were fragile little things that would break under pressure and never amount to anything in a real fight. And honestly, for a long while the evidence agreed with them. Now Ren Castellan came to Halberd Station on a supply hauler in the dead of the station's artificial night, which is when most of us arrived because nobody important wanted to be seen sending us. I remember the night she got there because I was the poor soul on dock duty, scanning manifests and freezing my fingers off. She came down the ramp last, after all the crates, after 2 grumbling Soltari engineers, and I'll be honest with you, my first thought was that someone had made a mistake on the transfer order. She was small, not just short, small the way a sparrow is small, thin wrists, a jaw that hadn't fully grown into her face yet. She couldn't have been more than 19. She had this beat-up duffel slung over one shoulder and it looked like it weighed more than she did. She stopped at the bottom of the ramp and looked around at the station like she was trying to memorize it. The cold steel, the flickering deck lights, the Vren sentries by the airlock who were already looking at her the way a cat looks at something small and twitchy. "Castellan," I said, checking my pad. She nodded. "Combat Division." She nodded again. And I almost laughed. I'm not proud of that, but I almost did. Because the Combat Division on Halberd was where the galaxy sent its monsters, the Vren shock troops, the Soltari blade dancers, and here was this kid who looked like a strong handshake would put her in medical. "You sure they've got the right file?" I asked her, trying to be kind about it, I swear. She looked at me, calm, tired but calm, gray eyes I remember, the flat gray of a planet's sky before it storms. "They've got the right file," she said. And then she walked past me into the station like she belonged there, which she didn't, not yet. The thing about a place like Halberd Station is that the cold gets into everything, not just the air, the way people talk to each other, the way the lights buzz, the way the whole place feels like it's holding a grudge. Ren got assigned to a bunk in the human section, which was the smallest section, tucked away near the recycling plant because that's where they always put us. The constant low hum of the recyclers got into your dreams. After a while, you stopped hearing it. Mostly. I didn't see much of her for the first few days. I had my own work, but you hear things on a station that size. Everybody knows everybody's business. And the business with Ren was this: she was failing. Not failing like she wasn't trying. Failing like the universe had decided she wasn't built for this and was determined to prove it. In the strength trials, she came in dead last. Not just among the aliens, among the humans too. There were guys in our section who could bench twice their weight. Ren could barely manage the standard kit load without her knees shaking. In the sparring rings, it was worse. I watched one of those sessions. I wish I hadn't. They paired her against a Soltari named Kesh, a lean gray-skinned thing with too many joints in its arms. Kesh wasn't even being cruel. It was just doing the drill. But every time it moved, Ren was already a beat behind and Kesh would tap her, shoulder, ribs, throat, each touch a point scored, each touch a small humiliation. She went down 9 times in 20 minutes. 9 times. And 9 times she got up. I think that's the part that started to get under people's skin, the getting up. There was a Vren instructor named Drask who ran the combat division. Big even for a Vren, scarred across one side of his face from some old war nobody talked about. He watched Ren go down for the 9th time and he didn't help her up and he didn't blow the whistle. He just looked at her, lying there in the ring with the breath knocked out of her, and he said, loud so everyone could hear, "This is what your species sends us. A child who cannot stand." Some of the recruits laughed. The aliens mostly. A couple of the humans too, the ones who wanted to look tough by joining in. I didn't laugh, but I didn't say anything either. I want to be honest with you about that. I just stood there. Ren got up, slow, one hand on the mat, then her knees, then her feet. Her lip was bleeding. She didn't wipe it. "Again," she said. Drask stared at her. "Again," she said, louder. And I swear, for just a second, something flickered across that big scarred face. Not respect. Not yet. More like the look you get when something doesn't add up, when the numbers don't make sense. He blew the whistle. Kesh moved. Ren went down a 10th time. That night in the mess hall, I sat across from her without really meaning to. There was an open seat, and I took it, and there she was, picking at a tray of reconstituted protein that nobody on that station could honestly call food. "You all right?" I asked. She looked up. "Why does everyone keep asking me that?" "Because you got beat up 10 times today, and you're sitting here like nothing happened." She thought about that, chewed. 11, actually. There was one in the morning drill you missed. I didn't know what to say to that. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Why are you all so afraid of being weak?" It caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" She set down her fork. "Everyone here, the humans especially, we spend so much energy pretending we're not scared, pretending we're tougher than we are. Drask laughs at me and half our section laughs along because they're terrified he'll turn it on them." She looked at me steady. "I'm not pretending. I know exactly how weak I am. There's a kind of peace in that." I didn't have an answer. I still don't, really. But I remember thinking she was either the most broken person I'd ever met, or she knew something the rest of us didn't. Turns out it was the second one. I just didn't find out for a while. Here's something they don't tell you about the Concordat military, and it's important for what comes next. Every species had its specialists, its elite. The Vren had their Ironborn, warriors bred and trained from infancy, walking weapons that the rest of the galaxy genuinely feared. The Soltari had their blade houses. The Garok had their wall brothers. And humanity had nothing. That was the official position. We were too new, too soft. We hadn't earned an elite designation, and the betting money said we never would. Except there was a rumor. There's always a rumor. You'd hear it in the older human soldiers, the veterans, the ones who'd been around since first contact. They'd talk, late at night, about something called the Masterborn. They said it wasn't a rank. It wasn't a training program. It was a thing that happened to certain humans under certain conditions. Something in the blood, the old one said. Something that had been in us since before we crawled out of the dirt on Earth and only woke up when there was nowhere left to run. Most people thought it was a fairy tale, a story we told ourselves to feel less small. I thought that too. A comforting lie for a species that kept losing. Drask thought so too. I know because he said as much in a briefing when one of the human recruits brought it up. He laughed, that grinding Vren laugh that sounds like rocks in a bag, and he said, "The Masterborn, yes. And when the recyclers break down, the ghost of Earth comes to fix them. Grow up. There is no hidden strength in the Brittlekin. There is only the strength you can measure, and you can be measured in a single afternoon." That line stuck with me. You can be measured in a single afternoon. He was so sure. It got worse for Ren before it got better. I want to walk you through it because the depth of how bad it got is the only way to understand how high it climbed after. There was an incident maybe 3 weeks in. Field exercise on the surface of Tabin 9. The planet's a frozen waste, -80 at noon, winds that'll take the skin off your face. They sent the whole combat division out in cold suits to run a mock objective. Capture a beacon, hold it, extract. Ren's squad got pinned. The exercise used live fire stun rounds, non-lethal, but they hurt like hell and they drop you cold if they hit center mass. Her squad leader, a human named Palk, made a call to fall back and leave the beacon. Standard call. Smart call even. But there was a problem. One of the squad, a young Soltari named Tella, barely older than Ren, had gone down in the open. Stun round to the leg. Couldn't move. And in the cold of Tabin 9, couldn't move meant going to die inside of about 10 minutes, exercise or not, because the cold didn't care that it was pretend. Palk hesitated. Everybody hesitated. Going back into that open ground meant getting dropped yourself. And here's the ugly truth nobody likes to say, Tella was Soltari, not human. And there's a part of every grunt that calculates, fast and quiet, whose life is worth what? Ren didn't calculate. I wasn't there for this part. I heard it from 3 different people, and they all told it the same way, which is how you know it's true. She just went. No order, no plan. She broke cover and ran into the open ground, this skinny human kid in a cold suit 2 sizes too big, straight into the line of fire to drag a Soltari she barely knew back to safety. She took 2 stun rounds doing it. One in the shoulder, one in the back. Either one should have dropped her. They didn't. She got Tella's arm over her shoulders and she dragged. Dug her boots into the frozen ground and dragged a body heavier than her own across 40 meters of open killing field while the stun rounds cracked around her. She got Tella back. Both of them collapsed behind the rocks. The exercise instructors called a halt. And you'd think she'd have gotten a commendation. You'd think. Instead, Drask put her on report for breaking formation, for ignoring her squad leader's order. He stood her up in front of the whole division and dressed her down for 15 minutes, said she'd endangered the exercise, said her recklessness was exactly the kind of undisciplined behavior that made the Brittlekin a liability. "You think you saved a life," he said. "You did not. You broke a chain of command. In a real battle, your stupidity gets the whole squad killed. The galaxy does not need heroes. It needs soldiers who follow orders." Ren stood at attention through all of it, didn't argue, didn't cry. But Tella stood up. This is the part the people who were there always pause on. Tella, the Soltari, the one she'd saved, stood up at the back of the division and said, in that strange, rippling Soltari voice that the translators rendered flat, "She saved my life. With respect, instructor, I am alive because of her. If that is undisciplined, then I want more of it in my squad, not less." The room went dead silent. A Soltari does not contradict a Vren instructor. It just doesn't happen. There's a whole hierarchy of species in the Concordat military, and the Soltari sit below the Vren, and everyone knows their place. Drask looked at Tella for a long moment. Then he looked at Ren. And then he did something I didn't expect. He didn't punish Tella. He didn't say anything at all. He just dismissed the division and walked out. But I saw his face as he left, and the thing that wasn't adding up before, it was bothering him more now, a lot more. Because 2 stun rounds had hit Ren's center mass, and she hadn't gone down. That's not toughness. Toughness doesn't beat physics. A stun round to the back drops a Garrock. It dropped one in a training accident the year before, and a Garrock is built like a cargo loader. Something was wrong with the Brittlekin. Or rather, something was right with her, in a way nobody had a word for yet. Except some of us did have a word for it. We just didn't believe it. I started watching her after that. Closely. Not in a creepy way, I just got curious. The way you do when you sense you're standing next to something that's about to matter. And once you started watching, you couldn't stop seeing it. Little things. She'd be at the bottom of every strength chart, dead last on paper, and then you'd see her carry a man twice her size out of a collapsed corridor during a drill and not break stride. On the timed runs she came in slow, but it was like she was holding back, packing herself, and when something actually went wrong, when the situation turned real, she had this extra gear nobody else had. It only came out under pressure. That was the key. In the controlled tests, the measurable ones, the ones Drask trusted, she was nothing. Average, below average, Brittlekin. But the moment a situation became life or death, the moment it stopped being a test and started being real, something in her changed. I asked her about it once. In the mess again. I'd started sitting with her on purpose by then. That thing on the surface, I said, 2 stun rounds, how are you walking around? She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I figured she wasn't going to answer. I don't really know, she finally said. It's like, when I get scared, properly scared for someone else, not for me, it's like a door opens. And on the other side of the door there's somebody who knows exactly what to do, somebody who isn't tired, isn't weak, isn't scared. She turned her cup in her hands. And when it's over, the door closes and I'm just me again, and I can barely lift my own arms. I didn't know how to finish. Crazy, I know. She gave a small, tired smile. My grandmother used to talk about it. She fought in the Reclamation Wars back before the Concordat. She called it the deep self. Said it ran in our family. Said every few generations it would wake up in somebody all the way, and that person would be. She trailed off. Be what? She shrugged. She never finished the sentence. She died before she could. I didn't push it, but that night I couldn't sleep. The deep self, the Masterborn, a fairy tale that kept refusing to stay a fairy tale. The Concordat had enemies. I should have mentioned that earlier. The thing about a galactic alliance is that the moment you draw a border, somebody on the other side of it wants what you have. In our sector, the threat was a faction called the Hadron. Don't picture monsters. The Hadron were a species, organized, disciplined, technologically vicious. They'd been raiding Concordat space along the Kesral line for years. Hit-and-run stuff mostly, supply convoys, outposts. The kind of targets nobody important cared about. Targets like Halberd Station. We weren't supposed to be a real target. That was the whole logic of the posting. Nothing important happened on Halberd. We were a forgotten rock with a forgotten garrison. The Hadron didn't get the memo. I remember the morning it started, or what passed for morning. I was in the logistics bay doing inventory on coolant cells when the proximity alarms went off. Not the drill tone, the real one. The one that makes your stomach drop into your boots because you've heard it in nightmares but never for real. The station-wide came on. The commander's voice tight and fast. All hands, this is not a drill. We have multiple unidentified contacts on intercept vector. Combat division to stations. Repeat, this is not a drill. I'd never heard the halberd sound like that. Boots everywhere. Bulkhead ceiling. That deep mechanical groan as the station's defense grid powered up for the first time since I'd been aboard, and the way the lights stuttered told you the grid wasn't sure it remembered how. The Hadron came in 3 ships, fast. Dark-hulled, ugly things shaped like blades. They hit the station's defense grid hard and the grid held, barely, and then they did the thing nobody expected. They boarded us. You have to understand, station defense is built around ships. You shoot the ships. You don't plan for boots on your own deck because by the time there are boots on your deck, you've already lost. But the HADRUN didn't want to destroy Halberd. They wanted what was inside it: weapons, stores, intel, prisoners, and maybe just to prove they could. They breached the lower decks, cargo level 3, right next to logistics, right next to me. I want to tell you I did something brave. I didn't. I hid behind a stack of coolant cells with my heart trying to climb out of my throat, and I listened to the sound of HADRUN boarders cutting through the bulkhead. If you've never heard it, the sound of a hull being cut from the wrong side is a sound you don't forget. This high screaming whine, and then the thunk of the breach, and then the smell. Burnt metal and something chemical, and underneath it the cold of vacuum-edge air. The first thing through the breach was a HADRUN trooper. Tall, armored in matte black, carrying a weapon I didn't recognize and didn't want to. And I knew, crouched there behind the cells, that I was going to die on a forgotten rock in a forgotten war, and nobody would even remember my name. That's when the lights went red, and the deck shook and everything changed. I didn't see the beginning of it. I was busy not dying. But I pieced it together later, from the recordings, from the survivors, from the half-dozen versions everyone tells. When the boarding alarm hit, the combat division scrambled to defensive positions. DRASK led them. Whatever else you want to say about him, the man was a soldier, and when the real thing came, he didn't flinch. He set up a defensive line at the junction between Cargo 3 and the main spine of the station. The CHOKPOINT the HADRUN had to take if they wanted to push deeper. Ren was in that line, bottom of the roster, stuck at the back where they put the ones they didn't trust. The HADRUN came hard. They were good, better than good. The first push broke a GARROKQOTES arm and put 2 VRENN on the deck. These weren't raiders. These were HADRUN shock troops, they're elite, and they cut into the Concordat line like it was nothing. DRASK called for a fallback to the secondary CHOKPOINT. Sound tactics, trade space for time. But there was a problem, the same kind of problem as before, the kind the universe seemed to keep putting in Ren's path like it was testing her. TELLA was down again. And not just TELLA. A cluster of wounded, 3 soldiers, human and SOLTHARI both, were trapped on the wrong side of the fallback line in the open junction with the HADRUN advancing right over them. To fall back meant leaving them. DRASK gave the order anyway. He had to. The math was the math. You don't lose the whole division for 3. And Ren, bottom of the roster, weakest soldier on the station, the BRITTLEKIN they all laughed at, Ren stepped out of the line and walked the wrong way. Toward the HADRUN. Toward the wounded. DRASK shouted at her. I've heard the recording. You can hear him, this big SCARREDVRENN, screaming Castellan. Hold the line, that is an order. Hold the line. She didn't hold the line. And this is where the story stops being a story about a weak girl and starts being something else. Part 2. I came out from behind the coolant cells. I don't know why. To this day I couldn't tell you. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was that some part of me, the same deep part Ren talked about, decided it would rather die standing than die hiding. I came out, and the HADRUN trooper who'd been about to find me turned at the noise from the junction, and that turn saved my life, because in that exact second the junction lit up. I had a view then, a clear, terrible view down the length of Cargo 3 to the CHOKPOINT, and I saw it. I saw all of it. I saw Ren standing over the 3 wounded soldiers with nothing but a sidearm and her own body. I saw the HADRUN line bearing down on her, 6, 7 of them, their elite, weapons up. I saw the gap between her and certain death close to nothing. And then I saw the door open. I don't have better words for it. Ren had described it to me as a door, and watching it happen, that's exactly what it looked like. 1 second she was the kid I knew, the small one, the tired one, the one who got beat up 11 times a day and got up every time. And the next second she was. Something else was wearing her. It started in how she stood. The slouch left her. The hesitation. Her spine straightened and her weight dropped low and centered, and suddenly she didn't look small anymore. She looked coiled, like a thing that had been folded up tight for a very long time and was finally unfolding. The first HADRUN reached her. I've watched the recording of what happened next maybe 200 times, in slow motion, frame by frame, and I still can't entirely tell you how she did it because it shouldn't be possible. Not for a human, not for anything that size. She moved. The HADRUN were fast, faster than humans. Everyone in the galaxy was faster than humans. That was the whole point of us being BRITTLEKIN. But Ren moved like the space between moments belonged to her. She slipped the first trooper's strike, just leaned out of it, casual, like she had all the time in the world, and her sidearm came up, and she put a round through the gap in his armor at the throat before his swing had even finished. The second one she didn't shoot. She stepped into him, inside his reach, where his weapon was useless, and she did something to his knee and his elbow in the space of half a breath, and he went down screaming. The third one got a shot off, point blank, center mass. It hit her, I saw it hit her. The round caught her in the chest, and I thought, that's it, she's done. Nobody survives that. And she didn't even slow down. I learned later what was happening inside her body. The medical people went over the recordings and the readings after, trying to understand it, and they only half could. When the Masterborn state woke in Ren, her whole body changed at a level you couldn't see. Bone density, muscle recruitment, pain suppression. Her nervous system started firing in patterns that human nervous systems aren't supposed to be capable of. The deep self wasn't a metaphor, it was real. Somewhere down in the human genome, in all of us, there was a switch, and almost nobody could throw it. But when it threw all the way. The HADRUN round that should have killed her cracked 2 ribs and stopped. Just stopped, like it had hit a wall. She killed the third trooper with her bare hands. I'm not going to describe it in detail. It wasn't pretty. The Masterborn state isn't pretty. It's not graceful in the way you imagine a warrior being graceful. It's brutal and economical, and there's no wasted motion in it at all. Every movement she made did exactly one thing perfectly, and that thing was usually horrible. By the time the 4th and 5th troopers understood what was happening to them, that the small, weak human they dismissed was tearing through their elite like wet paper, it was too late. She was already among them. I heard one of them make a sound. The HADRUN, the fearless HADRUN shock troops, and one of them made a sound I can only describe as fear. A high keening noise. He'd come to raid a forgotten station full of soft things, and he'd found something out of the oldest part of the human story, woken up and looking right at him. She broke their charge. One girl. She broke the charge of a HADRUN shock element, and the whole momentum of the boarding action broke with it. I need to tell you about DRASK, because the look on his face is the thing I'll take to my grave. He'd ordered the fallback. He'd watched Ren disobey, and in the few seconds it took for the Masterborn state to wake in her, he'd already written her off. I could see it in how he turned away to organize the retreat. He thought he was watching a foolish girl get herself killed for nothing. Then he heard the sounds behind him, the HADRUN sounds, and he turned back. And he saw what I saw. I was close enough by then to see his face. This was a VRENN who'd fought in wars that didn't have names anymore. A creature who'd told an entire division of recruits that the Masterborn was a fairy tale, that the BRITTLEKIN had no hidden strength, that a soldier could be measured in a single afternoon. He watched Ren Castellan throw a HADRUN trooper, a thing that outweighed her 3 times over, into a bulkhead hard enough to dent it, and his face just opened. Every certainty he'd ever had drained out of it. He didn't say anything. He didn't have anything to say. He just stood there and watched the impossible happen. And somewhere in there, I think the old soldier in him understood something the instructor in him had refused to. That the galaxy had been wrong about us. All of us. That under the soft skin and the breakable bones, humanity had been carrying something the whole time, and it only ever showed itself when there was no other choice left. Then Drask did the thing that made me start to respect him. He raised his weapon and he shouted, "On her, rally on her," and he charged back into the fight, leading the division into the gap Ren had torn open. Not because she needed help. By then she didn't. But because a leader knows when the moment has turned and he wasn't going to let her stand alone in it. The fight after that wasn't really a fight anymore. The Hadron were broken. They'd come for soft targets and found a Masterborn warrior and a Vren instructor with something to prove, and they did what any sane force does when the math turns against them. They ran. The ones who could, anyway. It ended fast, in the way these things do. 20 minutes, maybe. The Hadron pulled back to their breach point, and what was left of them tried to retreat to their ships. The station's defense grid, which had finally remembered how to work, caught 2 of the 3 vessels on their way out. The third limped away into the dark. And then it was just us, standing in the wreck of Cargo 3, in the smoke and the red emergency light, breathing hard, alive. I found Ren sitting against a bulkhead. The door had closed. I could see it the moment I reached her. Whatever had been wearing her, whatever ancient deep-down thing had stepped out and saved us all, it was gone, tucked back behind whatever wall it lived behind. And what was left was just Ren, small, shaking, 2 cracked ribs and a chest covered in her own blood and the blood of the things she'd killed. She looked up at me, gray eyes, exhausted past anything I'd ever seen. "Did it work?" she whispered. "Did they get out? The wounded did Tella." "They're alive," I told her. My voice wasn't working right. "Everyone's alive because of you." She nodded. And then this kid, this warrior who'd just broken a Hadron shock element with her bare hands, started to cry. Not from triumph. I want to be clear about that. She cried because she was so tired and so scared, and because for a few minutes she'd had to let something else be in control of her body, and now it was over and she was just herself again, just a person, sitting in the cold and the smoke wondering if it had been enough. I sat down next to her. I didn't say anything. Some moments you don't fill with words. That's when Drask came. He walked up slow, stood over her. This huge scarred Vren looking down at this tiny crying human, and the division gathered behind him, and the wounded she'd saved, and everyone who'd ever laughed at her in a training pit. The whole room went quiet. Even the recyclers, I swear, seemed to go quiet. And Drask got down on one knee. I'd never seen a Vren do that. I didn't even know they could. It's not a gesture their kind makes. It means something specific in their culture, something old. An acknowledgement, a warrior recognizing a warrior, a debt that goes deeper than words. "I was wrong," he said, just that, in front of everyone. "I called your people brittle. I said there was nothing in you that could not be measured." He looked at her and his scarred face did something I didn't have a word for. "I have been a soldier for 90 years. I have never seen what I saw today. I do not know what you are." A pause. "But I know what I will call you, Masterborn, and I will say it with respect for as long as I live." Ren didn't know what to do with that. She just stared at him, tears still on her face, and finally she managed, I'm not strong. The rest of the time I'm not. You've seen me. I'm the weakest one here." And Drask said the thing I've never forgotten. "No," he said, "you are not the weakest. You are the only one of us who knows exactly how weak you are and stands up anyway. That is not weakness, child. I mistook it for weakness because I had never seen real strength before. They are easy to confuse when you have only ever measured the wrong thing." Word got out, of course. You can't keep a thing like that quiet. The recordings went up the chain and the chain went all the way up. The Concordat didn't know what to do with it at first. A Masterborn human, confirmed on record, tearing through Hadron Elite, it broke their whole model of how the galaxy was supposed to work. There were arguments. There were people who wanted to study her like a specimen. There were people who were frightened of what it meant, that the soft little newcomers had this sleeping in their blood. But there were others too, older ones. The veterans who'd always half believed the fairy tale. And the rumor, the thing humanity had whispered to itself in the dark to feel less small, turned out to have been true all along. We did have an elite. We'd always had one. It just didn't show up on any test the galaxy knew how to run, because it only woke when everything else had failed, when there was someone to protect and nowhere left to run. They tried to promote Ren, reassign her to some prestige unit, parade her around. She turned it down, all of it. I asked her why, before she left Halberd for good. Because it's not really me, she said. That thing that comes out, it saved us and I'm grateful for it, but it's not who I am. Who I am is the one who gets beaten in the ring 11 times and gets up for the 12th. That's the part I'm proud of, not the door opening, the standing up before it does. She paused at the airlock. The same airlock she'd come in through in the dead of station night, with a duffel too big for her and a file nobody believed. You know what my grandmother never finished saying, she asked me. The sentence, about what a Masterborn would be. What? She was going to say human. Ren smiled just a little. She was going to say, when it wakes up all the way, that person would be the most human one of all, because the strength was never the point. The strength was just what it took to do the human thing, to go back for the ones you're not supposed to be able to save. And then she walked up the ramp and was gone. So that's the story, the whole of it more or less the way I saw it happen. They called her weak. Every single one of them, including me, in the quiet part of my heart I'm not proud of. We looked at this small, breakable girl and we saw nothing, because we were measuring the wrong thing with the wrong tools, and we never thought to ask whether the scale itself was broken. And she let us think it. She knew exactly what she was. She knew the weakness was real, the everyday weakness, the kind that lost in the ring and came last on every chart. She never pretended otherwise. That was the whole secret, I think. She wasn't faking strength like the rest of us. She'd made peace with being small, and that peace was the door the deep self came through when it finally mattered. I've thought about it a lot in the years since, about what Drask said. They are easy to confuse when you have only ever measured the wrong thing. The galaxy thought strength was the thing you could see, the thing you could weigh and time and rank. They thought a soldier could be measured in a single afternoon. But the real thing, the thing that wakes up in the worst moment, the thing that walks the wrong way down a corridor towards certain death, because someone you barely know is lying in the open and nobody else will go. That thing doesn't show up on any chart. You only find out who's carrying it when everything else has already broken. And maybe that's the most human thing there is. Not that we're strong. We're not most of the time. Most of the time we're exactly as brittle as they always said. It's that somewhere down at the bottom of us, under all the weakness we know perfectly well we have, there's a door. And when the moment comes, the real one, the one that counts, some of us open it. She was the weakest soldier on that station. I'll say it plainly because she'd want me to. And she's the strongest person I ever knew. That's the whole story. Take from it what you want. If you're just joining me, here's where we left off. There was a girl named Ren Castellan, small, quiet, the weakest soldier on a forgotten station called Halberd, orbiting a frozen rock at the edge of nowhere. The whole galaxy had a word for humans back then, brittlekin, the ones who snap, and Ren was the proof they pointed to. Last on every chart, beaten in the sparring ring 11 times a day and getting up every time for the 12th. And there was a Vren instructor named Drask who told an entire division that the Masterborn, the old human legend, the sleeping strength in our blood, was a fairy tale. You can be measured in a single afternoon, he said. He was so sure. Then the Hadron came. This is the part where everything they thought they knew about us came apart. I want to slow down here, because the morning it happened deserves to be told slow. It started ordinary. That's the thing about disasters. They almost always start ordinary. I was in the logistics bay running inventory on coolant cells, half asleep, thinking about nothing. The station hummed the way it always hummed. That low grinding noise from the recyclers that got into your bones after a while. The lights doing their tired flicker. Somewhere down the corridor someone was playing music too loud and someone else was telling them to turn it down. Just a normal shift on a station nobody cared about. And then the alarm. Not the drill tone. We all knew the drill tone, a polite little three-note thing that meant go stand somewhere and look busy. This was the other one. The one I'd only ever heard in the dark, in dreams, the one your body recognizes before your brain does. A flat, ugly, repeating blare that makes your stomach drop straight through the deck plating. I froze with a coolant cell in my hands, just stood there like an idiot listening. Then the commander's voice came over the station wide, and I'll never forget how it sounded. Tight, fast, a man reading numbers he didn't believe. All hands, this is not a drill. We have multiple unidentified contacts on intercept vector. Combat division to stations. All non-combat personnel to shelter zones. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. You learn a lot about people in the 10 seconds after a thing like that. Some ran for the shelters exactly like they were supposed to. Some just stood frozen the way I did. And a few, the combat division, the ones with the real training, moved toward the danger without a half-second of hesitation, boots hammering the deck, faces gone hard and blank. I saw Ren in that crowd, just for a moment through the bay doors as the division flooded past toward the lower decks. She was at the back the way she always was, the place they put the ones they didn't trust, and she looked exactly like she always looked, small, scared, out of place. I remember thinking, with this awful certainty, that girl is going to die today. I have never in my life been so wrong about anything. The Hadron came in 3 ships. I didn't see them with my own eyes. I was inside, with no window to the void. But I've watched the external recordings since, and I'll describe them to you because the shape of a thing tells you what it's for. The Hadron ships were dark-hulled and bladed, built like knives, every line of them designed to cut. No wasted curves, no softness anywhere. Ships built by a species that had decided a long time ago that mercy was a weakness and acted accordingly. They hit the station's defense grid hard. Now, here's a thing about Halbert's station that nobody liked to admit. The defense grid was old, older than half the crew. It had been installed back when the station mattered for about 5 minutes during some border dispute everyone had since forgotten, and then it had been left to rust while the galaxy moved on. The grid hadn't fired a shot in anger in 20 years. When it powered up that morning, you could feel it in the deck plating. This deep, reluctant groan, like an old man being woken up and told to fight. The lights stuttered all over the station as the grid pulled power it hadn't pulled in 2 decades. For a sick few seconds, I genuinely wasn't sure it was going to come online at all. It did, barely. It held the first pass. It even clipped one of the Hadron ships. You could hear the cheer go up 2 corridors over. And then the Hadron did the thing nobody on Halbert had ever planned for. They stopped trying to destroy us. They boarded us instead. I cannot stress enough how much that broke the whole logic of the place. Station defense is built around ships. You shoot the ships. The entire doctrine assumes that by the time anything physically reaches your hull, the situation is already a tragedy. Nobody runs boarding drills on a backwater logistics station. Why would you? Who'd ever bother boarding us? The Hadron bothered. They didn't want to blow Halbert out of the sky. They wanted what was inside it. The weapons stores. The intel cores. Prisoners, maybe. Or maybe they just wanted to walk through a Concordat station full of soft little brittlekin and take it apart with their hands to send a message up and down the Kesrel line about what happened to forgotten things. They breached the lower decks, cargo level 3. Right next to logistics. Right next to me. Here is the part I'm not proud of. I've told it before and I'll tell it again, because if I clean it up the rest of the story stops being true. When I heard the hull being cut, and there is no sound in the universe like a hull being cut from the wrong side, this high screaming whine that goes through your teeth, I didn't grab a weapon. I didn't run to help. I didn't do one single brave thing. I hid. I crawled behind a stack of coolant cells in the corner of the bay, and I made myself as small as I could, and I prayed to every god I'd ever half believed in that the thing coming through that wall wouldn't find me. The whine stopped, then a sound like a thunderclap, the breech blowing inward, then the smell, burnt metal and something chemical, and underneath it the strange thin cold of vacuum-edge air rushing where it shouldn't be. And then footsteps, heavy, deliberate, the footsteps of something that wasn't afraid of anything in that room. I peered through the gap between two cells, and I saw my first hadron. Tall, taller than a man by a head and a half, armored head to foot in matte black plating that drank the light. It carried a weapon I didn't recognize, long and cruel looking, and it moved through the bay sweeping that weapon side to side, hunting, methodical, patient. A professional doing a job it had done 100 times. It was working its way toward my corner. I knew in that moment with total clarity that I was going to die. Right there, on a forgotten station, in a war the rest of the galaxy would never read about. I thought about my family back home. I thought, stupidly, about the inventory I'd never finish. I thought nobody will even know my name. And then, 2 corridors away, down at the choke point where the combat division had set their line, everything came apart at once, and the world I thought I understood ended. Let me take you down to the choke point. I pieced this part together later, from the recordings and from a dozen survivors, and they all tell it the same way, which is how you know it's true. The combat division had set up at the junction between Cargo 3 and the main spine of the station, the choke point, the one spot the Hadron had to take if they wanted to push deeper into Halberd. Drask led the defense himself. Whatever else you want to say about the man, and I've said plenty, when the real thing came, he didn't flinch. He set the line, he set the fields of fire, he put his strongest soldiers forward. He was a soldier down to the marrow, and in the worst moment, he was exactly where a leader should be. Wren was at the back, of course she was. The Hadron came hard. The recordings of that first clash are difficult to watch. The Hadron shock troops weren't raiders, they were elite, the best their species had, and they hit the Concordat line like a hammer hitting glass. The first exchange put 2 Vren on the deck and snapped a Garrox forearm clean through its armor plating, and a Garrox forearm is a thing the size of a tree trunk. The division held, but it bent, and bending is how lines break. Drask did the correct thing, the thing the manuals tell you to do. He called a fallback to the secondary choke point, trade space for time, regroup, hold the narrower ground. But there was a problem. The same kind of problem the universe kept laying in Wren's path, like it was testing her, like it already knew what she was and just needed her to find out too. When the line bent, a cluster of wounded got caught on the wrong side of it. 3 soldiers, human and Soltari both, down in the open junction, hurt, unable to move, directly in the path of the advancing Hadron, and one of them was Tella. The young Soltari Wren had dragged out of the cold on the surface of Tabin 9 weeks before, the one who'd stood up for her in front of the whole division when nobody else would. To fall back was to leave them. Drask knew it. Everyone knew it. The math was the math. You don't lose a whole division to save 3, and a good commander doesn't pretend otherwise. He gave the fallback order anyway, his voice flat and hard on the recording because that's what the job demanded. And Wren stepped out of the line and walked the wrong way. You can hear Drask on the recording. You can hear the exact moment he realizes what she's doing. He roars at her, this huge, scarred old Vren, 90 years a soldier. Castellan, hold the line, that is an order. Hold the line. She didn't hold the line. She walked toward the Hadron, toward the wounded. One small human girl with a sidearm and nothing else, walking into the teeth of a shock element that had just shattered the toughest soldiers on the station. And somewhere up in the logistics bay, with a Hadron trooper 3 steps from finding me, I made a choice of my own. I came out from behind the coolant cells. I still can't fully tell you why. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was that some deep part of me, the same part Ren had once tried to describe to me over a tray of bad food, decided it would rather die on its feet than be found cowering. I stood up. I made noise, and the Hadron trooper hunting me turned toward the sound from the junction instead, and that turn is the only reason I'm alive to tell you any of this. Because when he turned, I had a clear line of sight down the length of Cargo 3 to the choke point. And I saw the door open. I'd better explain what I mean by the door, because it's the whole heart of this. Weeks earlier, Ren had tried to describe to me what happened to her under pressure. She said it was like a door opening. She said that when she got properly scared, not for herself but for someone else, a door would open inside her, and on the other side of it was somebody who knew exactly what to do. Somebody who wasn't tired, wasn't weak, wasn't afraid. And when the danger passed, the door closed and she was just herself again, so wrung out she could barely lift her own arms. She called it the deep self, her grandmother's word, an old soldier's word from the Reclamation Wars, from before the Concordat ever found us. I'd nodded politely when she told me. I'd thought she was either broken or telling herself a comforting story. I'm telling you now, I was wrong, and I saw the proof with my own 2 eyes. Down at the choke point, Ren reached the wounded and put herself between them and the Hadron. 6 of them, maybe 7. They're elite, weapons up, bearing down on her, and the gap between her and certain death closing to nothing. And then she changed. It started in how she stood. The slouch went out of her, that small, tired, apologetic way she always held herself, the posture of someone the world had taught to take up as little space as possible. It just drained away. Her spine came up straight. Her weight dropped low and centered. And all at once she didn't look small anymore. She looked coiled. Like something that had been folded up tight for 10,000 years was finally unfolding into the light. The first Hadron reached her. I've watched the recording of the next 10 seconds more times than I can count. Slowed down, frame by frame. And I still can't entirely explain it because it should not be possible, not for a human, not for anything that size and shape. She moved. The Hadron were fast, faster than us, faster than almost anything in the Concordat. That was simply how the galaxy was built. But Ren moved like the space between one moment and the next belonged to her and her alone. She didn't block the first trooper's strike. She slipped it, just leaned out of the way of it, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world, and her sidearm came up and put a single round through the seam in his armor at the throat before his swing had even finished its arc. The second one she didn't shoot. She stepped into him, inside his reach, where his long, cruel weapon was useless, and in the space of half a breath she did something to his knee and something to his elbow, and he folded to the deck screaming in a register I didn't know the Hadron could produce. The third one got a shot off, point blank, center mass. It hit her. I saw it hit her. The round caught her square in the chest, and I thought, that's it, it's over, nobody survives that. And she didn't even slow down. The medical people went over the readings afterward, trying to understand what had happened inside her body. They could only half explain it, and the half they could explain frightened them. When the Masterborn state woke in Ren, her entire body changed at a level you couldn't see from outside. Her bone density spiked. Her muscles started recruiting fibers in patterns human muscles aren't built to use, firing all at once instead of in the careful, protective sequence that keeps ordinary people from tearing themselves apart. Her pain response simply switched off. Her nervous system began running faster than a human nervous system is supposed to be capable of running, fast enough that the gap between us and the quicker species of the galaxy just closed. The deep self wasn't a metaphor. It was real, and it was physical, and it had been sitting in the human genome the whole time. A switch almost no one could throw. But when it threw all the way. The hadron round that should have killed Rin cracked two of her ribs and stopped. Just stopped. Like it had struck a wall and given up. She killed the third trooper with her hands. I won't describe it closely. The Masterborn state isn't beautiful, whatever the legends say. It isn't graceful the way you picture a hero being graceful. It's brutal and economical, and there is not one wasted motion anywhere in it. Every single thing she did accomplished exactly one purpose perfectly, and that purpose was almost always terrible. By the time the fourth and fifth troopers understood what was happening, that the small, weak human they'd written off had just torn through three of their best in the time it takes to draw a breath, it was already too late for them. She was among them. And one of them made a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. The Hadron. The fearless Hadron shocked troops, the terror of the Kestrel line. One of them made a high, broken, keening noise that the translators didn't even try to render, because there was nothing to translate. It was just fear. Raw, animal fear. He'd come to raid a station full of soft things, and instead he'd woken something out of the oldest and deepest part of the human story, and now it was looking right at him. She broke their charge. One girl. She broke the charge of a hadron shock element, and the entire momentum of the boarding action broke along with it. I have to tell you about Drask's face, because if there's one image from that whole day that I'd hand to you if I could, it'd be that one. He'd given the fallback order. He'd watched Ren disobey it, and in the few seconds it took the deep self to wake in her, he'd already written her off. You can see it on the recording. The way he turns away to organize the retreat, the small dismissive motion of a man who's watching a foolish girl throw her life away for nothing and can't afford to watch. Then he heard the sounds behind him, the hadron sounds, and he turned back. And he saw what I saw. This was a Vren who had fought in wars so old they didn't have names anymore. A creature who had stood in front of an entire division of recruits and told them, with total certainty, that the Masterborn was a children's story, that the Brittlekin had no hidden strength, that a soldier could be weighed and measured and ranked in a single afternoon. He watched Ren Castellan lift a Hadron trooper, a thing 3 times her mass, off its feet, and throw it into a bulkhead hard enough to leave a dent in the steel. And his face just opened. Every certainty he'd carried for 90 years drained straight out of it. I was close enough to see it happen. The instructor in him died right there, in the smoke and the red light, and something older woke up in its place, the part of him that had been a young soldier once, that still remembered what it felt like to see something true and impossible at the same time. Then he did the thing that made me start, finally, to respect the man. He raised his weapon and he bellowed, on her, rally on her. And he threw himself back into the fight, leading the division into the gap Ren had torn open, not because she needed the help. By then she plainly didn't, but because a real leader knows the exact instant a battle turns, and he was not going to let her stand alone in the moment that turned it. After that, it wasn't a fight anymore. It was a rout. The Hadron were broken. They'd come hunting soft targets and found a Masterborn warrior and a furious Vren with 90 years of pride to reclaim, and they did the only sane thing left to them. They ran. The ones who still could. They pulled back to their breach point and scrambled for their ships, and the old defense grid, which had finally remembered what it was for, caught 2 of the 3 on the way out and turned them into light. The third limped away into the dark, carrying the news. And then it was just us. Standing in the ruin of Cargo 3, in the smoke and the emergency lighting, breathing hard, alive. Alive when by every law the galaxy believed in, we should not have been. I found Ren sitting against a bulkhead. The door had closed. I could see it the instant I reached her. Whatever had worn her body, whatever ancient deep-down thing had stepped out and saved every soul on that station, it was gone, folded back behind whatever wall it lived behind. And what was left was just Wren, small again, shaking. Two cracked ribs, a chest soaked in blood that was partly hers and partly things I didn't want to think about, gray eyes gone hollow with an exhaustion I'd never seen on a living face. She looked up at me. "Did it work?" she whispered. Her voice was barely there. "The wounded Tella, did they get out?" "They're alive," I told her. My own voice had stopped working right. "Everyone's alive. Wren, because of you, you did that, all of it." She nodded. And then this girl, this warrior who had just broken a hadron shock element with her bare hands, started to cry. Not from triumph. I need you to understand that. She cried because she was so tired and so frightened, and because for a few minutes she'd had to step aside and let something else drive her own body, and now it was over and she was just herself again, just a person, sitting in the cold and the smoke, wondering if it had been enough. I sat down next to her on the deck. I didn't say anything. Some moments you don't fill with words. You just sit inside them with somebody so they don't have to be there alone. That's when Drask came. He walked up slow. The whole division gathered behind him, the wounded she'd saved, the soldiers who'd held the line, every single recruit who had ever laughed at her in a training pit, including the ones who'd laughed loudest. The room went quiet. Even the recyclers seemed to hush. And Drask got down on one knee in front of her. I didn't know if Wren could do that. I didn't know it was a thing their bodies or their pride would allow. I learned later it means something exact in their oldest traditions. A warrior acknowledging a warrior, a debt that runs deeper than rank or words. A thing a Wren does perhaps once in a lifetime, if ever. "I was wrong," he said, just that to start. Out loud in front of everyone, this proud old soldier who had never in 90 years admitted to being wrong about anything. "I named your people brittle. I told these recruits there was nothing in you that could not be measured in an afternoon." He looked at her, and that scarred face did something I had no word for. "I have soldiered for 90 years. I have never seen what I saw today. I do not know what you are." He paused. "But I know what I will call you. Masterborn. And I will say it with respect for as long as I draw breath." Wren didn't know what to do with that. She just stared at him through her tears and finally managed, "I'm not strong. The rest of the time I'm not. You've all seen me. I'm the weakest one here." And Drask said the thing I have never been able to forget. "No," he said, "you are not the weakest. You are the only one among us who knows exactly how weak she is and stands anyway. That is not weakness, child. I mistook it for weakness because in 90 years I had never once seen the real thing. They are easy to confuse." His voice dropped, almost gentle. "They are very easy to confuse when you have spent your whole life measuring the wrong thing." Word got out. You cannot keep a thing like that quiet. The recordings went up the chain, and the chain went all the way to the top. The Concordat didn't know what to do with it. A confirmed Masterborn human, on record, tearing through Hadron Elite, it broke the model they'd built the whole galaxy on. There were arguments at levels of command I'll never see. There were people who wanted to take Wren apart and study her like a specimen, to find the switch and learn to throw it. There were people who were frightened of what she meant, that the soft little newcomers from the edge of nowhere had this thing sleeping in their blood, all of them, just waiting. But there were others too, older ones. The human veterans who'd always half believed the fairy tale, who'd whispered about the Masterborn on long night watches to feel a little less small. And the rumor turned out to be true after all. Humanity had always had its elite. We'd carried it the whole time. It just never showed up on any test the galaxy knew how to run, because it only ever woke when everything else had failed, when there was someone to protect and nowhere left to run. They tried to promote Wren, reassign her to some showpiece unit, parade her up and down the Concordat as proof of something. She turned all of it down, every offer. I asked her why, the day she finally left Halberd for good. "Because that's not really me," she said. "The thing that comes out, It saved us, and I'll be grateful to it forever, but it isn't who I am. Who I am is the one who loses in the ring 11 times and stands up for the 12th. That's the part I'm actually proud of. Not the door opening, the standing up before it ever does. She stopped at the airlock. The same airlock she'd come in through in the dead of station night, a lifetime ago, with a duffel too big for her and a transfer file nobody on board believed. "You know, my grandmother never finished a sentence she used to start," she said, "about what a Masterborn would be when one woke up all the way." What was she going to say? Human? Wren smiled, just a little, just at the corner of her mouth. She was going to say that person would be the most human one of all, because the strength was never the point. The strength is only what it takes to do the human thing, to turn around and go back for the ones you're not supposed to be able to save. And then she walked up the ramp and she was gone. So that's the whole of it, the way I saw it happen start to finish. They called her weak, every one of them. Me too, in the quiet corner of my heart I'm not proud of. We looked at this small, breakable girl and we saw nothing, because we were measuring the wrong thing with the wrong tools, and not one of us ever stopped to ask whether the scale itself was broken. And she let us think it. That's the part that still gets me. She knew exactly what she was. She knew the weakness was real, the everyday kind, the kind that came last on every chart. She never once pretended otherwise. That was the whole secret, I think. She wasn't faking strength the way the rest of us were always faking it. She'd made her peace with being small, completely and honestly, and that peace was the door the deep self came through when it finally mattered. I've turned Drask's words over 1,000 times since. They are easy to confuse when you have spent your whole life measuring the wrong thing. The galaxy thought strength was the part you could see, the part you could weigh and time and rank and write on a chart. They thought a soldier could be measured in a single afternoon. But the real thing, the thing that wakes in the worst possible moment, the thing that walks the wrong way down a burning corridor towards certain death, because someone you barely know is lying in the open and nobody else will go, that thing doesn't show up on any chart ever made. You only ever find out who's carrying it after everything else has already broken. And maybe that's the most human thing there is. Not that we're strong. We're not most of the time. Most of the time we are exactly as brittle as they always said. It's that somewhere down at the very bottom of us, underneath all the weakness we know perfectly well we have, there's a door. And when the moment comes, the real one, the one that counts, some of us open it. She was the weakest soldier on that station. I'll say it plainly because she'd want me to. And she is the strongest person I have ever known. That's the story, the whole of it. Take from it whatever you need.